The first time I saw the bulldozer rolling across my pasture, I honestly thought someone had taken a wrong turn. Not a small mistake either. This was a full-size construction bulldozer crawling right through the corner of my land like it belonged there, chewing up grass that had been growing untouched for 15 years. And the strange thing was, nobody had said a single word to me. Now, if you've never lived in a rural county, there's something you should understand. Out here, land isn't just dirt. It's boundaries, it's pride, it's history. My place sits just outside a small town called Redfield, Tennessee, about an hour east of Nashville if traffic's light. Nothing fancy, just a modest farmhouse, an old red barn that leans a little in the wind, and about 12 acres that I've slowly pieced together over the years. I'm not a big landowner, just a guy who likes his quiet. The property's shaped a little funny though. On one side, I've got County Road 17 running along the front fence. Behind me, there's a big stretch of land that used to be soybean fields. For decades, that farmland belonged to the Wilkins family. Old Mr. Wilkins used to wave every time he drove his tractor past my place. But about a year before this whole mess started, the Wilkins kids sold that land to a development company out of Atlanta. The rumor around town was they planned to build some kind of distribution warehouse out there. Most folks figured that meant more trucks on the highway and maybe a few jobs. Nobody expected it to turn into the circus it did. See, the farmland behind me technically had road access already. There was an old gravel entrance on the far side of the tract, about half a mile around from my place. It wasn't the prettiest road in the world, but it was legal, and it had been there forever. That should have been the end of it. Except convenience has a funny way of making people forget about boundaries. One Tuesday morning early in spring, I stepped outside with my coffee and heard the sound first, that low diesel rumble you feel in your chest before you even see the machine. It was coming from behind the barn. Now that struck me as odd because nobody should have been back there except me. So I walked around the side of the barn, and that's when I saw it. 2 bulldozers, 3 dump trucks, and a crew of maybe 8 guys in hard hats standing in my pasture like they were planning a tailgate party. One bulldozer was already pushing through the corner of my fence line. My fence wasn't anything fancy, just old cedar posts and wire, but it had been standing there longer than half the men working that machine had probably been alive. And down it went like it was nothing. The blade pushed the posts over, the wires snapped loose, and the machine kept crawling forward. Behind it, another crew was laying down these giant timber mats across the grass so the dump trucks could drive through without getting stuck. They were building a road across my land. I just stood there for a moment watching it happen because sometimes your brain takes a minute to catch up with what your eyes are seeing. Then I started walking toward them. One of the workers noticed me first and nudged the guy next to him. Pretty soon the whole crew turned and looked like they had just spotted a deer wandering onto the highway. A tall guy in a bright orange vest stepped forward. Mid-40s maybe, sunburned neck, clipboard tucked under his arm. The foreman, no doubt. He gave me a polite little nod. Morning. I took a sip of my coffee and looked past him at the bulldozer that had just flattened another section of fence. Morning, I said slowly. You folks lost or something? A couple of the workers chuckled like it was a joke. The foreman didn't. He glanced toward the equipment, then back at me. No, sir, we're opening an access road for the warehouse project back there. He pointed toward the cleared farmland behind my property. I followed his finger, then looked back at him. You mean the Wilkins tract? That's the one. I nodded once, calm as could be. All right. And why exactly are you opening that road through my pasture? For a split second, his expression changed. Not shocked exactly. More like mildly annoyed, the way someone looks when a stranger interrupts their workday with something inconvenient. Well, sir, this is the most direct route from the county road. I stared at him. That wasn't the question. I set my coffee cup on the hood of my truck and walked over to the broken fence post lying in the grass. You see this fence? He nodded. Been right here longer than that bulldozer's been in existence. Then I pointed at the ground beside it where a metal survey marker stuck up out of the dirt. And you see that marker? He leaned down, brushed some dirt away, and frowned slightly. Yeah, that marker means something real simple. I said, everything on this side of it belongs to me. A couple of the workers shifted uncomfortably. The foreman straightened up and cleared his throat. Sir, we have site access approval for construction vehicles. I raised an eyebrow. Do you now? Yes, sir. Well, that's great. I said, then you won't mind showing me the easement paperwork. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped through the pages on his clipboard like the document might magically appear if he shuffled them enough. Finally, he looked back up. We're operating under project authorization. That wasn't paperwork. That was a sentence. I folded my arms. All right, let's try that again. You got a legal easement that says you can cut a road across my property? Silence. Behind him, the bulldozer idled, its engine rattling the quiet morning air. He glanced back at the machine, then at his crew, then finally at me. Sir, we were told this route was approved. By who? Our project manager. I nodded slowly. And did your project manager happen to own this land? Another pause. Because if he does, I said, that's going to be a surprise to me, seeing as my name's still on the deed. Now a couple of the workers started looking genuinely nervous. The foreman shifted his weight. Look, I'm just running the crew. We were given coordinates and instructions to open this path. Across private property. Across what we were told was the designated access corridor. I glanced down at the flattened fence, the timber mats, the tracks carved through my grass. Then I picked up my coffee again and took another slow sip. All right, I said quietly. You boys go ahead and finish your morning. The foreman blinked. Excuse me? I turned toward the house. I said finish your morning. Because while you're out here making yourselves comfortable, I'm going to go check a few things. And if what I think is happening is actually happening, well, this little shortcut of yours isn't going to last very long. I walked back to the house slow, not because I was calm, but because I didn't want them to see how irritated I actually was. Out here, when someone crosses your fence line without asking, that's not just bad manners, that's a statement. And the thing that bothered me most wasn't even the bulldozer tearing up my grass. It was how casually they were doing it, like the land didn't belong to anyone, like it was just empty space between two useful places. Inside the kitchen, I set the coffee down and pulled out the old file drawer where I keep property documents. Every landowner out here keeps one of those drawers. Deeds, surveys, tax maps. The boring paperwork that becomes very interesting the moment someone tries to tell you where your land ends. I found the survey first. Big sheet of paper, folded a dozen times, yellowing at the edges. I laid it out across the table and ran my finger along the lines. The boundary marker I showed that foreman was right where I remembered it. And the road they were carving? It ran straight through the corner of my pasture, about 40 yards inside my property line. No easement, not even close. Now I'll admit something here. I'm not the kind of guy who flies off the handle. Years ago, I might have stormed back out there yelling, shut the whole operation down with a scene. But I've learned something about conflicts like this. You don't win them by shouting. You win them with evidence. So instead of marching back to the pasture, I grabbed my phone and walked the entire area slowly. I photographed everything. The bulldozer tracks, the timber mats, the broken fence posts, the survey marker they had driven around. Every detail. By the time I finished documenting it all, there were even more trucks rolling through the path they'd cut. Big gravel haulers rumbling across my grass like it was a county road. I stood there watching for a minute, shaking my head. They weren't just testing a route. They had already committed to it, which meant somebody up the chain had decided my land was the easiest solution. So the next call I made wasn't to the construction crew. It was to my attorney. Now my lawyer's name is Diane Caldwell. She's been practicing property law in Redfield County for almost 30 years. And if there's one thing Diane enjoys more than paperwork, it's catching developers who think rural landowners won't fight back. She answered on the third ring. Well, if it isn't Mr. Landowner himself, she said. What trouble have you wandered into today? I told her what was happening. At first she thought I was exaggerating. A bulldozer? On your pasture? 2 of them, I said. And they've already knocked down part of my fence. There was a pause. Did you give anyone access? No. Any recorded easements? Not that I know of. You have your survey? Right in front of me. Then Diane's tone changed completely. Take pictures of everything, she said. Every track, every machine, every piece of damaged fence. Already done. Good. Then send them to me. I did. About 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. Well, she said, sounding both amused and annoyed at the same time. You're right. About what? There's no easement across your parcel. None temporary, none permanent. I leaned back in my chair. That's what I thought. But Diane wasn't finished. So either someone made a very expensive mistake, or they're hoping you won't notice. I glanced out the window toward the pasture where another dump truck had just crawled across the timber mats. Oh, they noticed. They just didn't ask. Diane hummed thoughtfully. Give me a couple hours, she said. I'm going to call the county planning office and pull their project approval documents. All right. And in the meantime, I looked outside again. They're still driving across the field. Diane chuckled softly. Let them. Trust me. Sometimes the best thing a trespasser can do is keep trespassing. Because every minute they do it, the paperwork gets worse for them. By mid-afternoon, the situation had escalated without me saying a single word to the construction crew. More machines arrived. An excavator. Another bulldozer. At least 10 dump trucks. By that point, the path through my pasture had turned into a full-blown temporary road, wide enough for 2 trucks to pass each other. I walked down there again, mostly just to observe. The same foreman spotted me. He jogged over, wiping sweat from his forehead. Sir, everything all right? I nodded toward the machines. Looks like you boys are settling in. He laughed awkwardly. Big project. Yeah, I said. Sure is. He hesitated a second. You talked to anyone about access? Oh yeah. And I shrugged, still checking a few things. He looked relieved. Good deal. Then he turned back toward his crew. And that's when I knew something interesting. He genuinely thought this would all work itself out. Someone above him had clearly told the team this route was approved. In their minds, I was just the landowner who hadn't been informed yet. But about an hour later, Diane called again. And this time she sounded sharper. All right, she said. I spoke with county planning. And their approved access route is on the opposite side of the property. The gravel entrance. Exactly. I felt a little grin creep across my face. Meaning the road through your pasture was never part of the plan. Not even temporarily. Correct. I leaned against the porch railing watching another truck cross my grass. So they're just improvising. Pretty much. There was a small pause. Then Diane said something that made me chuckle. You know what the funny part is? What? Their entire environmental and traffic review was approved based on that gravel entrance. Which means if they're using a different access point, they're technically violating their own construction permit. I stared out at the trucks again. Well, that's interesting. It gets better, Diane continued. I also asked about temporary construction access permits. Yeah, none filed for your parcel. So legally speaking, they have absolutely no right to be driving through your land. I let that sink in. Then Diane said the thing that changed everything. You know what you could do, right? I already knew what she meant. Yeah, I said slowly. I think I do. Block it. Simple as that. Put up barriers right on your boundary line. Concrete if you want to make a point. If they want access, they can negotiate properly. I looked across the pasture where the bulldozer had carved that ugly brown scar through my grass. And suddenly the whole situation felt less irritating and a lot more satisfying. Because here's the thing developers sometimes forget about rural landowners. We don't move fast, but when we do, we tend to move decisively. So the next morning before sunrise, I made a couple phone calls. First was to a local fencing company run by a guy named Marcus Hill. Second was to a contractor who specialized in heavy concrete barriers, the kind you usually see around highway construction zones. By 8:30 that morning, 2 flatbed trucks rolled into my driveway carrying about 15,000 pounds of concrete blocks. Marcus pulled up right behind them with a crew and a trailer full of steel fence posts. He stepped out of his truck, looked toward the pasture where construction trucks were already rolling across the timber mats, and whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. They've been doing that long. Couple days. He shook his head. They asked permission? Not once. Marcus grinned slowly. Then let's give them a surprise. We drove the trucks down to the exact spot where my property line crossed the makeshift road. I showed Marcus the survey marker. Right here. He nodded. Say no more. Within 20 minutes, his crew started driving reinforced steel posts into the ground along the boundary line. Meanwhile, the contractor backed the flatbed into position. The first concrete barrier slid off the truck with a heavy thud that echoed across the pasture. And that sound got the construction crew's attention. The foreman looked up from across the field. Then he started walking toward us. The foreman reached us about the time the second concrete barrier dropped off the truck. It hit the ground with a dull thud that you could feel through your boots, the kind of sound that makes it very clear something permanent is happening. He stopped a few feet away, hands on his hips, breathing a little heavier than before. Now hold on a second, he said. Marcus didn't even look up. His crew was already lining up another barrier while the post driver hammered steel into the soil right along the survey line. The foreman turned to me. Sir, what exactly is going on here? I kept my voice calm. Just improving my fence line. He looked from the steel posts to the concrete blocks. That's not a fence. No, I said. It's a boundary. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Behind him, another dump truck rolled up along the timber mats, and then stopped when the driver realized the road ahead was slowly disappearing behind 15,000 pounds of concrete. The driver leaned out his window. "Hey, Rick, we still good?" The foreman, apparently named Rick, didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the barrier now sitting squarely across the path they had carved through my pasture. "You can't block this road," he finally said. I tilted my head slightly. "Sure I can. This is an active construction access route. Across my land. We were told this corridor was approved." "By who?" I asked. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again. Marcus finally stepped over and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Listen, man," he said casually, "we're putting this fence right on the surveyed property line. If your road happens to run into it, that's not really our problem." Rick looked back at the equipment, then at the barriers, then at me again. "This is going to shut down our deliveries." I nodded. "Probably. You know how expensive that is. You know how expensive a trespassing lawsuit can be." I replied. That hung in the air for a moment. Behind him, the third concrete block slid off the truck and locked into the others like a giant gray puzzle piece. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "Look," he said, lowering his voice a bit. "Let me call the site manager. Be my guest." He stepped away and pulled out his phone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but judging from his tone, it wasn't a pleasant one. While he talked, Marcus' crew kept working. Post, barrier, post, barrier. Within half an hour, the entire shortcut they had carved across my pasture was sealed off by a solid wall of concrete and steel. Rick finally came back over. "My manager wants to speak with you." I shrugged. "Sure." He held out the phone. A new voice came on the line. Smooth, corporate, irritated. "This is Daniel Harwood, project manager for Southeast Logistics Development." "Morning, Daniel," I said. "Mr. Grady Collins." "Mr. Collins, I understand you're installing barriers that block our construction access route." "That's correct. You realize that route is necessary for material deliveries." I glanced over at the row of trucks now idling awkwardly in my field. "Seems that way." There was a long pause on the other end. "Mr. Collins, shutting this down is going to cost our project a significant amount of money." "I believe it will." Rick watched me carefully while I spoke. Daniel continued. "Perhaps we can work something out here. A temporary access agreement. Maybe some compensation for the inconvenience." I couldn't help smiling a little. "You mean the access you started using without asking?" Another pause. "Look," Daniel said, sounding less patient now. "We're willing to offer a fee for short-term use of that corridor." "How much?" $5,000. Marcus let out a small laugh beside me. I covered the phone slightly. $5,000 to drive semi-trucks across 12 acres of private land for months? I lifted the phone again. "Daniel, if we're going to discuss access to my property, we're going to do it properly." "Meaning?" "Written agreement. Insurance coverage. Land restoration guarantee. Legal review." Silence. "And until then," I said, "this fence stays exactly where it is." His tone cooled immediately. "You're seriously delaying a multi-million-dollar project over a strip of grass." "No, Daniel. I'm enforcing a boundary." Another long pause. Finally, he said, "We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Rick lowered the phone slowly. "So what now?" I looked at the barriers. "Now you boys use the entrance your permit says you're supposed to use." He rubbed his face. "That road isn't ready for this traffic." I gave a small shrug. "Sounds like a construction problem." The first real turning point came later that afternoon. A white county pickup truck rolled up the gravel driveway. Out stepped a man named Carl Jennings, the county construction inspector. Carl's been doing that job for years. Quiet guy, doesn't waste words. He walked the pasture slowly, looking at the barriers, the tire tracks, the broken fence. Rick and a couple of supervisors hovered nearby, looking very uncomfortable. Carl eventually turned to them. "Your permit shows access from the east gravel entrance." "Yes, sir," Rick said. "So why are your trucks coming through here?" Rick glanced toward me, then back at Carl. "Temporary route." Carl shook his head. "Temporary routes require authorization. We're working on that." Carl pulled a notepad from his pocket and wrote something down. "Until it's approved," he said calmly, "you'll need to comply with the access plan on file." Meaning the gravel road. Meaning the gravel road. The supervisors looked like someone had just handed them a very large bill. And in a way, someone had. Over the next 2 weeks, something kind of fascinating happened. That massive construction project behind my land slowed to a crawl. Heavy equipment sat parked while crews scrambled to reopen the original entrance on the far side of the property. The gravel road that had been inconvenient suddenly became very important. They widened it, reinforced it, added drainage. All the work they should have done in the first place. Meanwhile, the scar through my pasture sat quiet. The timber mats were eventually removed. Grass slowly started growing back. Marcus' fence line remained exactly where we installed it, concrete barriers still locked together like a silent reminder. About 3 weeks later, I got another call from Daniel Harwood. His tone this time was noticeably different. "Mr. Collins, we'd like to resolve the fence damage and restoration issue." Good idea. Their company ended up paying for the entire fence repair. They also signed a formal acknowledgement of trespass as part of the settlement, covering the restoration costs to the pasture. No dramatic courtroom battle, just paperwork and a check. These days the trucks still come and go from that warehouse site. But they use the gravel entrance on the east side exactly like the permit always said they should. Every once in a while I'll see a driver glance toward my property line where those concrete barriers used to stand. They're gone now, but the message stuck. Here's the thing though, and this is where I'm still curious what other folks think. Some people around town told me I should have just taken the money and let them use the shortcut. Said I could have made a lot more than $5,000. Maybe they're right, but to me it was never really about the money. It was about the assumption, the idea that someone could just roll machines across your land because it was convenient. So now I'm honestly curious what you would have done in my situation. Would you have taken the deal and let them use the road? Or would you have shut the whole thing down the same way I did? Let me know what you think. I read the comments, and trust me, around here people have some pretty strong opinions about property lines.